Unexpected moment of silence in a crowded room that made you feel uncomfortable? So do this. Show of hands. Well, I didn't do that for applause. So do this. Be honest with me. How many of you thought something was wrong during that 30 seconds of silence? It wasn't. Hey, we're talking today about the spiritual discipline, a spiritual discipline that I think is one of the most undervalued and unappreciated of all the spiritual disciplines. We've been talking for the last several weeks about this idea of what it means to have a guide to spiritual formation, what it means to grow in something called godliness. And we've talked about what it means to be in God's Word and spend time in prayer. And last week, what I said was, I think, the most misunderstood and underused of all the spiritual disciplines in terms of fasting. Today we're going to talk about what I think is one of the most unappreciated and undervalued. But what the point of this entire series and what we're pursuing together is something the Bible calls godliness. And here's our basis for this series. It's found in 1 Timothy chapter 4. The Bible tells us to train ourselves for godliness. The word train, we see it said almost every week, is the word gymnasio in the Greek, the original language the New Testament was written in. And it's where we get our word gymnasium from. We're to work, train, discipline ourselves for something called godliness. And what is godliness? We've said that it is simply the active pursuit of fully knowing God. That's kind of a simple way you can think about godliness. The active pursuit of you and I fully knowing who God is. Train ourselves for godliness because bodily training has some value, but godliness has value in every way. And so we've been looking each week, and for about 8 weeks in total, we're going to be in this series, looking at different disciplines that train ourselves to achieve this godliness that has a value to our life in every way. And today we're going to look at, again, the most underappreciated and undervalued of all the spiritual disciplines, I think, and that is the value of solitude. We're going to talk about the value of solitude today. In his book, Celebration of Discipline, Richard Foster says, our fear of being alone drives us to noise. And I'm not sure that I think it's always our fear of being alone drives us to noise, but I do agree that we are a people that have become conditioned to view noise as normal and silence as awkward. Would you agree with that? And we've just been conditioned that there has to always be something going on, always has to be something being said, always something playing in the background, always something going on in our lives. Can't sit still for very long. We're not good at sitting still, and we're not good at being quiet. To the point it seems awkward when we do. And I think it's led to a point that many of us actually have an addiction to noise. How many of you know what this phrase refers to right here? The phrase white noise. Anybody know what white noise is? Anybody use white noise to go to sleep at night? How many of you have to have a fan in your room or you can't sleep? And it's partly because of the breeze, and it's mostly because of the noise, right? I mean, I'm that way, I'll be honest with you. When I was 13, I spent an entire summer on our family's farm in Indiana with my grandparents. And before I went, my dad sent me with this oscillating fan. He said, because you're going to be sleeping upstairs. Our house doesn't have air conditioning. I know because I grew up in it, right? So I had this fan all summer long, all night long. It would kind of turn, keep me cool. And the noise, I got so used to it that when I got home back to Florida in the air conditioning, I still had to have the fan. And all these years later, it's just a lot of years. I'm not going to tell you how many years later, but it's a lot of years later. I still got to have that noise or I can't sleep. So much so, I've become conditioned to that noise in the background. I can't even study without white noise, if I'm honest with you. In my office, and I think most everybody here knows that, I got this fan in my office that when I need to study and I need to really give my undivided attention to something, I pull the curtain on the window in my office and I turn the fan on right behind my desk to drown out everything. Otherwise, I get distracted about every 15 minutes by whatever's going on. I got to have a little noise. I can study better at Starbucks than I can in a library, right? That white noise, it does something. We're addicted to noise. We have white noise in this room every week. You might not even realize it. And we set the HVAC for the fan to be continually on, partly to circulate the air, partly just so it doesn't go quiet, because when it's quiet, it's awkward. There's music playing when you come in the room. And the moment the music turns off, everybody does what? You kind of stop talking and turn and face the stage because you're anticipating something's about to happen. And you probably don't even think about the music that's playing in the background. We're just conditioned to noise. And if there's silence for too long, we get uncomfortable. And the truth is that most of us have not only become conditioned to noise, like sounds drowning out other sounds in the background, we've become conditioned to noise drowning out other things in our life. Webster's defines white noise this way. It's a meaningless or distracting noise that drowns out other sounds. That's what white noise is. We know that. It's nothing, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. But what you might not think about, and what I think maybe we don't really consider most of the time, is that just as much as physical audible sounds, that there is white noise that is meaningless and distracting, that drowns out many of the good and godly things that are taking place in our lives, and we don't even recognize it sometimes. Here's what I mean. How many of you, what do I mean by like white noise in our life going on in the background? 2 words: social media. How many of you sitting still like at the doctor's office? You got 5 minutes till the doctor comes and gets you. What do? I can't sit still for 5 minutes. I got to grab my phone and flip through social media to see where everybody's eating lunch today, and hashtag waiting on the doctor, like anybody really cares, right? I mean, we can't sit still, just like we can't have quiet. We have noise and things going on in our life all the time. We're just conditioned to that. The problem with that is this. The problem is that we've become so used to the noise going on in our lives, and the news and politics and things going on at work and my family and all of these things that are creating all of this commotion and all of these distractions in my life, that we've almost become conditioned to the white noise of life drowning out the voice of God, and we begin to view it as kind of a normal and acceptable experience when it comes to following Jesus these days. And yet the Bible has an awful lot to say about solitude. And if I'm honest with you, I don't know many of us that practice regularly the discipline of solitude for the purpose of godliness. I know some of you, especially moms in the room, that practice solitude for the purpose of sanity. And that's quite all right. That's a fair game right there. All right, I give you permission to do whatever you need to do as far as all of that's concerned. But I don't know many of us that practice solitude for the purpose of seeking God. Solitude for the purpose of growing our relationship with God and our understanding of who He is and what He calls our life to be in response to who He is. And yet, Jesus very regularly practiced the discipline of solitude. Let me give you a few examples. The night before Jesus called His first 12 disciples, those 12 guys, that He called, Peter and James and all of those guys, the night before, Jesus actually spent time alone before He called the 12 disciples. Here's what it says in Luke chapter 6 about that Jesus went out to the mountain to pray, and all night He continued in prayer to God. And when day came, He called His disciples and chose from them 12. The night before, Jesus makes one of the most important decisions that He's going to make in terms of His ministry. The 12 guys that I'm going to choose to follow me, to be mentored by me, who ultimately would take the message of everything I came to bring and carry it to the ends of the earth and would oversee and lead that entire charge. What did Jesus do? He got alone by Himself to pray. He engaged the discipline of solitude, spending time with the Father, praying. The moment Jesus receives news that John the Baptist, his friend, his cousin, has died, the Bible says this in Matthew 14, that Jesus, when He heard this about John, He withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by Himself. Jesus engaged in and practiced the discipline of solitude when He was grieving. Maybe you've experienced that. On another occasion, Jesus, we're told in the Gospels, performs one of His most impressive, significant signs that He performs. We talked about these signs just a few weeks ago before Easter, but the sign of Jesus feeding the 5,000 with just a few pieces of bread and fish. You guys know that sign, right? And He's ministering to the masses, to the crowd. There's 5,000 men, the way it describes it, not even including the women and children. Thousands of people there. Jesus is ministering to them. He's teaching. He's just helping them understand who God is. And when He finishes all of that, here's what it says, again in Matthew 14, that after He dismissed the crowd of the 5,000, He went up on the mountain by Himself to pray. When evening came, He was there alone. And the night before Jesus is crucified, He leaves the upper room in that Last Supper meal with His disciples, and He goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. And He sets His disciples there and says, stay here, and I'm going to go off and I'm going to pray. And it says this about what Jesus did. He went with them to a place called Gethsemane, and He said to His disciples, sit here while I go over there and pray. Jesus made a habit of being alone. But it wasn't just a habit of being alone for the sake of being alone. Jesus made a habit of being alone, seeking solitude for the purpose of praying and of listening to the Father. So today, here's what I want to do. We've been doing this throughout this whole series. I want to give you, first off, a few of the important benefits of solitude, of seeking times alone as a follower of Jesus for the purpose of fully knowing God and pursuing godliness. I want to give you a few of those benefits, and then I want to give you a few very simple, practical ways to incorporate this into your life on a regular basis. First, here's one of the most important reasons that I think that you and I should engage in the discipline of solitude according to the Scriptures. It's for this reason, to reflect on who God is. To reflect on who God is. Reflection is an important practice in the life of any person. And in particular, reflecting on who God is. There's a lot of things that you know about God. There's a lot of things that you might just think and assume about God. But do you actually spend time reflecting on what the Bible says is actually true about God? One of the most famous scriptures about this in all of the Bibles is found in the 46th Psalm, where the psalmist tells us to be still and know that I am God. Important, a couple things in this. First, be still. Like sit down, calm your mind, calm your heart, close your mouth, and just be still. And I'll be honest with you, if there's anything that I am not good at in life, it is this right here. A couple of years ago, right after Christmas, we kind of give some time off to folks on our staff the week after Christmas, and got that whole week off, and I'm at home, and it's December 26th, all right? And so it's been a busy week for us. You know, we had all Christmas services here and a lot of things going on, time with family, all that going on. The day after Christmas, it's about 11 o'clock in the morning. My wife's sitting on the couch watching television. You know, we're just kind of taking it easy, didn't have any plans that whole week. I walk up and I'm standing behind the couch and just kind of trying to decide how I'm going to break this to her. And she turns around and she goes, "You're bored already, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yeah, I kind of am. I've decided I'm going to build those shelves above the garage doors like I've been talking about for the last, 3 years. And so I made a trip to Lowe's, bought all the wood, and for the next few days, that was how I was going to be still, right? That was my vacation break, was building shelves in our garage. I have a lot of trouble with this. But here's the thing I've also learned. When I'm not still, it's very difficult for me to see the hand of God at work. What it is very easy for me to see are all the things that are not going the way that I had planned. What is easy for me to see is all the things that God is not doing the way that I had wished He was doing in my life. When it's not difficult to see when I'm busy and not still, the easiest thing in the world for me to see is me. But when I'm still, when I quiet my life and quiet my heart and I just take a break and direct my attention to God, in those moments, I give God the space to actually show me what is true about who He is. Be still is one of the requirements to actually knowing that God is God. It's one of the biggest benefits of solitude. And when you begin to understand who God is, being still and finding moments of solitude has a second benefit of it. And it helps me on the basis of now who I know God is, it helps me also to reflect on who I am. To reflect on who God is and then to reflect out of that understanding of God, reflect on who I actually am. One of my favorite verses that kind of lends towards this is found in Romans, Paul's letter to the church in Rome. And I love these words he writes in chapter 12. He says, "Do not think of yourself more highly than you ought, but with sober judgment." It's just a really nice way of saying, quit being so arrogant, Brian. Don't think of yourself so highly. Don't think of yourself so much. But here's what you do have to do to get this right. It does require you thinking of yourself. It does require that I need to stop and I need to think, how highly do I think of myself? What view do I have of myself? How do I come off to other people? What really is the longings of my heart? What are the things that I'm giving my life to? What are the ways that I'm reacting to the things going on in the world? Do the things I post on social media actually benefit the people that read them? There's a good reflection all of us could probably spend some time on this week. But to make sure that we don't make this mistake, and I don't think any of us want to be this person, right? Walking around just an arrogant person that's always putting your needs above everybody else's. Nobody wants to be this person, but to make sure we're not this person requires spending some time alone in the quiet, in solitude, thinking about how I think about myself. How healthy is my heart? What are the things I tend to run to when life gets hard? What are my escapes? What are my temptations? What are my desires? And what do they say about the health of my soul? Listen, friends, if you don't spend time reflecting on who you are in light of the gospel of Jesus, it's a very dangerous way to live. But the fact is, most of us, many of us at least, and I'm certainly one that's guilty of that as much as anybody else, we run so incredibly fast most of the time that we don't have time to do this. I don't have time to slow down. And there were seasons in my life where I've run so fast that I did not do this, and I can tell you on 2 separate occasions what almost happened. I almost burnt myself out and kind of walked away from ministry, not because I didn't love God and not because I didn't love you and not because I didn't think God was calling me to give my life in service to his people in the church the way that I do. It's because I just had nothing left. Because I was unwilling to discipline myself for godliness through the discipline of solitude by stopping and asking, who am I right now? Am I healthy? Am I whole? Am I seeking God with all of my heart? Solitude for the purpose of reflecting on who God is and reflecting on who I am. Incredibly important to the discipline of solitude. And here's the third benefit of solitude, and that is very simply to listen for the voice of God. I don't do this a lot, but I'm going to do it right now. How many of you right now, how many of us, I'll say it this way in the room because I'm one of these, right now are praying and waiting on God to answer something? Like give you wisdom, direction, fix something. Anybody waiting on God to answer something? All right, so what do you need to find that answer? You kind of need to hear and be able to sense and interpret the leading and the answer in the voice of God, right? Well, one of the most basic ways to listen for the voice of God, according to the Bible, is to actually spend time alone with God. Jesus said it this way, that my sheep actually hear my voice and I know them and they follow me. My sheep know my voice. And when I'm speaking, they know and they can hear and they'll understand, and as a result, they'll follow. But to understand someone's voice this deeply, with this much familiarity, what does it require? It requires time spent with that person. Here's what I mean. All of you moms in the room, you go to the grocery store, or better yet, where there's even more people, let's go to Walmart. Everybody's favorite trip to make on any given day, right? So you're at Walmart, and your kid's going to look for something. You go one direction, and they're going the other direction, and they're old enough to do that, all right? So they're not 2. And all of a sudden, they decide they can't. Yeah, they're 3, that's right. So all of a sudden, they decide they can't find you, and they start screaming, Mom. How many other moms are in that building? And when they scream Mom, they're really not that concerned. I mean, they'll help the child if they think they're lost, but they're not like driven to go run towards that child. But you, on the opposite side of the store, in the middle of the meat department at Walmart, and they're on the electronics end of the store or whatever else, you're thinking to yourself, what did they do now? That's what you're really thinking, right? But you know it's your kid. You recognize their voice. All my mom had to do when I was a kid, maybe misbehaving, our youth group would sit on the front row of the church in Leesburg, First Baptist Church in Leesburg when I was a kid. And we tended to misbehave probably a little bit more in the front than we ever did in the back. But we'd sit up in the front, and if we were ever misbehaving, all I had to hear was, yes, Mom. Wouldn't it be great if you and I could recognize God's voice that way? And yet Jesus says it's possible. It is possible to be so intimately acquainted with Jesus that you recognize his voice the moment that he speaks. But I also want to tell you, one of the disciplines to getting there, to knowing Jesus that intimately, is time alone with him. Times of solitude that I've spent seeking God and reflecting on who God is and reflecting on who I am in light of who God says that I am and who he is. And just spending time in his word and praying and listening to the voice of God. It's hard to follow God when you can't hear. And you'll never hear God if you're not listening. And it's hard to listen when life's filled with noise. I think that's one of the reasons why Jesus modeled for us these moments of solitude. You realize I don't think Jesus actually needed them. I mean, he did. He did because in addition to being fully God, the Bible tells us he took on the full nature of man. He was fully God and he was fully man because he wanted to experience everything you and I experienced and suffer in every way as you and I have suffered and be tempted in every way that you and I are tempted so he could be good and faithful to us. And as a high priest serving on our behalf before the Father. But he didn't actually need solitude because at any given moment, Jesus could have said, I don't really need this. Like, I'm kind of over this experiment. I'm over this moment. He could have. He was the Son of God. He could have called on that at any moment, and it would have been over. It would have ended, and he didn't. And in so doing, living as you and I lived, he modeled the discipline of solitude for these reasons and a whole lot more. So think about these reasons right here when it comes to listening in particular. Listening for the voice of God. Man, would you agree with me that maybe as a people as a whole, we've gotten really bad at that? Just listening? The next election comes around, just watch the first debate that comes up, right? It's not really a debate. A debate kind of suggests that somebody's talking and somebody's listening, somebody else is responding and somebody else is listening. Most debates anymore, at least politically speaking, are just one great big argument, really loud argument, right? And everybody's kind of waiting just not to listen to what you have to say, but waiting for you to stop so I can say what I want to say. And isn't it interesting when it comes to conflict between people that really the same thing is true? I asked Cesar Perez this week on our staff. He's our licensed counselor on our staff. And he focuses a lot on marriage and family counseling and relational counseling. And I asked him, I was like, hey man, just quick numbers. How significant would you say when a couple, a married couple or a parent and a child or two people are unable to resolve a conflict, how highly would you say one or both of them not listening to the other is one of the big problems in that situation? He goes, top two easily. I'm like, really? I would have said probably top 5 or so. He's like, no, top 2. He goes, now, don't quote me on that as though it's been scientifically proven. I'm just telling you that is my experience. When two people can't work out a conflict, when they can't get on the same page, it's almost always because one or both of them, they have a lot to say and are unwilling to actually listen. And friends, what I'm trying to get at is that if you're at all frustrated with your relationship with God, if God seems distant or if you're trying to figure out what it means to actually follow Jesus, learning to listen for the voice of God is one of the most important disciplines that you can develop. And so, like I said, there's a lot other benefits to solitude. These are just 3 that I thought were really, really important for us to talk about, 3 of the most significant, that when you have times of solitude, you incorporate it into your life. It will give you space to actually reflect on who God is, to reflect on who you are, and it will give you space to actually listen for what God is saying. Now, here's the big question. How do you practice that? Well, I'm going to give you a few practical ways that I try to incorporate this into my life. None of these are earth-shattering. In fact, you know what I find a lot of times? We come into church, we come into a setting like this, and we expect every time we walk in the door to hear something we've never heard before and be blown away by some new revelation or understanding of God in the Bible that I've never seen. And yet, you know, one of the biggest convictions I've developed over the last several years is if you and I would just spend the rest of our lives actually living out the things we've already learned about what it means to follow Jesus, it would not be a waste of time. And so what I'm going to tell you, it's nothing new. It's nothing that's going to just wow you. But if you're like me, as simple as it is, it's one of the most difficult things to actually be consistent doing when it comes to solitude for the purpose of godliness. But here's the first one that is just so important to me and to my life, and I think it would be to you as well, and that is simply this: to set a time. Set a time. Set a time to be alone. Set a regular time that, you know what, I'm going to eliminate distractions. I'm going to put my phone down or away. No matter how many notifications I get during that time, I am not going to pick it up because the earth will still be there 15 minutes from now. But I'm going to set a time to be alone, and I'm going to grab maybe my Bible, and I'm going to spend some time reading, and I'm going to spend some time praying, and I'm going to spend some time listening. But I'm going to set a time to do it. If you want to grow in godliness, then start by setting a consistent, regular time to read and to pray and to reflect on what you have learned and what the voice of God is actually saying to you. And here's one of the reasons why I think it's so important to set a time. Jesus did it. In Mark chapter 1, it says that very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up and left the house and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. very early in the morning. That was one of Jesus' common practices when it came to finding times alone with the Father. He'd just get up early before anybody else, and he'd go be alone with the Father. A consistent designated time with God. And I'm not talking 4 hours. I'm talking 15 to 30 minutes. If you and I would start on a regular basis dedicating 15 to 30 minutes just to read and to pray and to listen to the voice of God, do you think at all it might help with the hurried pace and the noise that life is so good at creating in us? Moms, if anyone needs to do this, you do. I kind of jokingly said that you're probably good at taking times of solitude for the purpose of sanity, and that's, you know what, okay. And I'm serious, moms. If anybody needs this, to set a time that you're just alone with the Father, it's you. And you don't need to apologize for it, and you're not being selfish by doing it. And I'm going to say this directly to moms this morning, not just because it's Mother's Day, but because moms, as far as I see and what I've witnessed and experienced, that moms are so good at putting everybody else's needs above their own and ahead of their own, and they leave themselves for last, which usually means there's nothing left. At the same time, you want to serve your family well, you want to raise your children well. A healthy soul is one of the most important qualities you can have as a mom. Set a time and don't apologize for it. Set a time and don't feel guilty about it. Spend time with your Heavenly Father. And for Jesus, it was often early in the morning. And I actually had a pastor at one point that would tell you that if it's not early in the morning, it's not going to be as beneficial. I don't agree with that because, listen, I'll tell you, I am not a morning person. In fact, everybody around here knows you want to have a really significant conversation or meeting with me in the morning, make sure I've had at least 2 cups of coffee. Right? Because it just ain't happening. Yeah, all right. Tammy's on page with me. I personally think coffee is one of God's gifts to us. But anyway. But I don't care if it's early in the morning. I don't care if it's last thing at night. I don't care if it's in the middle of the afternoon. Just set a time and don't apologize for it. Be disciplined about protecting it. Because it's funny, we are disciplined to protect the things that are important to us. I guarantee you are really good at protecting a time to eat lunch and dinner. Protect a time to be alone with the Father. Set a time, and then here's the second practice. Set a place. Find a place. Find a place that is meaningful for you. Find a place that is quiet for you. A place that you can go back to time and time again. That verse in Mark chapter 1, it says this about Jesus. He got up very early in the morning. But he got up, he left the house, and he went off to a solitary place. It was just by himself. It was just him. He had a time that he set, but he also found a place that was quiet, alone, just with him and the Father. And you know what else it says about Jesus? That this discipline of doing this early in the morning and setting a time and finding a place, that it was a regular habit of Jesus. Luke records this in his gospel. He says that Jesus often withdrew to lonely places. It wasn't just occasional. It was not only when life is crazy. It wasn't only when I'm at my wit's end and I got to be by myself or somebody's going to die today. Like, it can't just be that moment. It can't just be I have lost my patience. It can't just be that I'm about to do something really stupid. I mean, those are moments where you need to find a solitary place to be alone with Jesus. Absolutely. But that wasn't all for Jesus. It was his regular practice. Often he would withdraw for the purpose of being alone with God. I'll tell you, one of the things for me, I've found places. For me, I'll tell you where some of my places are. One of my simplest places that I do this is on our back porch late in the afternoon. Where our house sits and the way that it sits, kind of the back of our house faces to the north. It's up on just a little bit of a hill right there, and there's almost always a breeze late in the afternoon, and oftentimes, especially this time of the year, the sun kind of falls below the tree line well before it sets, and it's just extremely beautiful. And our family knows it's not uncommon to see me out there on the back porch sitting in one of those chairs all by myself. Sometimes I've got my Bible, sometimes I'm praying, sometimes I'm just sitting and reflecting on the goodness of God. Listen, for me, there's few things that remind me of God's goodness more than a beautiful sunset or time over the water. For whatever reason, it's just reminding me of God's goodness. There's other places that have been significant for me. Like some of you'll know for years, one of the disciplines I had was at least once a year and sometimes twice a year, I'd get away and go back to my family's farm in Indiana. It's a literal place where for whatever reason, I'm just able to unwind and to calm down and to spend time with God. And I'd come back more refreshed for a week there than I would doing a lot of other things. And granted, that takes a lot more planning, maybe even a little more money and all of that than just walking out on the back porch at the end of the day. But the point is this: find a place that you can be quiet, alone with the God, on a time that you set regularly to do that. Those are the first two, and those are pretty easy. The third one I'm going to give you, I'll be honest with you, for some of you is going to seem maybe a little more legalistic. And for most of us, it's going to be a tougher one to swallow because of the pace at which we live our life. But the Bible gives us an amazing gift when it comes to finding moments of solitude in order to pursue God. And it's something called the Sabbath. You want to practice the discipline of solitude? Keep a Sabbath. Now, some of you, I put that up there, and I guarantee you're thinking, well, isn't that an Old Testament thing? Well, it is. I'd also argue it's a New Testament thing, and that it should also be a 2021 thing. Let me ask you a question. How many of you would describe yourself using any of these words, or you have used any of these four words in the last week or two? Tired, stressed, overscheduled, overwhelmed. Anybody used any of those four words? I'm tired, I'm stressed, I'm overscheduled, I'm overwhelmed. Anybody? If you have used those words, if you would use those words, if those words describe you in any way, do you think some unrushed, unhurried time at the feet of Jesus would help that at all? Do you think some time intentionally carved out and set apart for the purpose of just hanging with your family, eating a meal and riding a bike, swimming in a lake, running from alligators? I don't know. You think it would help the tiredness, the stress, the overscheduled feeling that you and I have, carving out time to rest and enjoy a recreation activity that your family loves to do? It's really amazing, because if you think that would benefit you, you're actually in luck, because God gave you something for that exact purpose. It's called a Sabbath. Now, here's the thing. Most of us, when you think of a Sabbath, I guarantee you what you're thinking of is exactly what I said. All you know about the Sabbath is what it says in the Old Testament. That in Exodus, for example, Exodus chapter 20, it says, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. On the seventh day, you won't do any work. That's probably all a lot of us know about the Sabbath. It's the day we're supposed to have off, right? And that you're supposed to keep it. But maybe you, and I know some people that grew up in an extremely legalistic environment that actually took this literally in every sense. You don't do anything on that day, right? That was the Pharisees' problem in Jesus' day. The Sabbath had become this thing that they were so worried about keeping that they had all these rules to God's rules about what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath, and as a result, they kind of completely missed the point. But here's the thing. The Sabbath is actually mentioned 167 times in 144 verses in the Bible. And just so you don't think that it's predominantly an Old Testament thing, 61 of those occasions and 56 different verses are in the New Testament, talking about the Sabbath. But Jesus had something to say about this that ought to help you understand a little bit more the purpose of it. It's not just about a day that you and I would not work, and it's not just about a day that you and I would keep as holy. Jesus said this about the Sabbath. He said that the Sabbath was made for man. Man wasn't made for the Sabbath. Now, why did he say that? What Jesus was explaining in this verse is that God did not, in the beginning, when he created man and the world, get to the end of it all and say, you know what, on the seventh day, I'm going to create a Sabbath. But if I'm going to create a Sabbath day that's going to be a holy day, I need to create some people that would keep that day holy for me. That was not the order of events. The order of events was, I'm going to create man in my image. And I'm going to put them in the garden. And I'm going to bless them, and I'm going to tell them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over everything that's there. Develop, expand, grow. The gift of the earth that I've given you, but I also know something about the way that I've made you. And so I'm going to create a seventh day, and I'm going to call it a Sabbath, and I'm going to make it holy, because I know you need a day to get alone by yourself. I know you need a day to rest. You need a day to refocus and to reflect and say, you know what, we're not going to run at the pace that we're normally running at today. We're going to slow it down, and we're going to spend some time seeking God, and we're going to spend some time relating to each other as a family, and I'm going to spend some time just refocusing my heart in the direction that my activities are taking me the other 6 days of the week to make sure that I'm actually training myself for godliness. Because I can train myself to be the best business owner, the best employee, the best teacher, the best worker. I can climb the ladder, I can be successful, I can make a lot of money, I can make a name for myself, I can gain the entire world. But if I don't slow down and reflect and make sure that my life is pursuing godliness, I'm in danger of gaining the whole world with my life and losing my soul at the same time. And Jesus himself said, what a pity that would be. And so he gave us a gift. He gave us a gift called a Sabbath. Now I'll tell you, I'm not a big fan of making this a legalistic day. I don't really care what day of the week it is. Jesus didn't either. Because his point was, God gave you a gift, a day that he made for you to reflect on who he is and who you are, and to listen for the voice of God and to spend with the people that you love and doing the things that are going to rejuvenate you. And I have learned over the last 22 plus years that I've been here at this church as your pastor, that the seasons of my life where I ignored this were some of the most exhausting, spiritually unhealthy years of my life. And the times where I make this a priority, it's almost been this amazing miracle moment with God, almost like fishes and loaves. Because the reason I normally didn't keep a Sabbath, here was the reason I would not keep it. I don't have time. I got too much to do. There's another person that he's ministered to. There's another sermon that needs written. There's another child that I got to take to a football game or coach baseball, and I want to do all those things. I don't have time. I got so many responsibilities. I'm so incredibly important, I don't have time to actually obey what God said to do. I wouldn't say it out loud, but that's the way that I lived. And on at least 2 separate seasons of my life, God humbled me in such a way that almost audibly I could hear him say to me, Brian, you're thinking of yourself way more highly than you ought. I don't need you to work 7 days a week to do in this world what only I can do. So work hard for 6. Take a Sabbath. Spend it with me. Spend it with your family. Rest. Enjoy the day. And most of all, honor me. Seek me that I can put your life together the way I designed it to be together. Solitude is one of the most important disciplines you and I could ever focus on and incorporate it into our life. But it's one of the most undervalued and unappreciated of them all, I believe. At least it is for me. And so this morning, as simple as this message is, that again, solitude helps you reflect on who God is and reflect on who you are and to listen to the voice of God. And you can incorporate solitude in your life simply by setting a time to do it and finding a place to do it and keeping a Sabbath, a day to rest and reflect. It's not that complicated. And yet I'm willing to bet most of us in this room would say, at best, we're sporadic to being disciplined in solitude for the purpose of godliness. So here's how we're going to close today. I'm going to close by giving you another minute or so of silence like I did at the beginning. Only this time my hope is it's not going to be an awkward thing because you think something's gone wrong and that I was just sitting back at my desk drinking coffee because I needed some. But maybe for just a moment, for just a minute, no instruments are going to be playing, no music's going to be in the speakers, it's just going to be silence. And that you would spend the next minute or so just seeking God. Just praying whatever you need to pray, listening for whatever you need to listen to, and mostly just quieting your heart. And maybe the most important thing you can pray in this moment is this: God, help me take this minute of solitude and turn it into a regular discipline for me to seek you, not just in this minute, but every day. So I'm going to give you about a minute, and then I'm going to close this in prayer. Just spend this moment alone in the quiet with God. God, the truth is we live in a world that is filled with noise and that is constantly filling our hearts and minds with things that distract us, meaningless things that distract us from you. And they're not always even bad things. Sometimes they're very good things, but they get very loud and very distracting. But God, I pray that we would learn to take our cue from Jesus, to develop the discipline of regular times of solitude, that we could just be quiet and not only be okay with the quiet, but anticipate your Spirit speaking to us and leading us and ministering to us in the moments of silence. God, I pray that we would all find it within ourselves to set a regular time at a healthy place to read your word, to pray, and to listen, and to receive. God, for those of us that life is so busy that just the schedule is what is loudest in our life, God, that we would have the courage to keep a Sabbath. Not as some legalistic rule of the law, but as a gift from you to slow the pace of our life down, to enjoy our relationship with you and all the other gifts that you've been so good to give us in our life. May solitude, God, be practiced among us in a way that leads us to godliness, that we experience the benefit of fully pursuing you and fully knowing you the way you designed us to. And God, on this Mother's Day, I thank you for the moms in this room. And if anybody among us knows what it means to live a life full of noise and distractions in a way that's very loud and busy, they do. God, I pray your hand would be upon them. You would encourage them. They would feel loved on this day that we set aside to honor them, that they would know that they are loved, they are appreciated, and most of all, that they would know that they are your daughters, that they belong to you, and that you have nothing but good for them. God, we love you, and we give you praise and glory and honor on this day. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.